Abdiaziz, you're on the air with myself and Filmon on Youth Hour. Can you just introduce yourselves to our audience?
Thank you so much. First, I really wanna thank you guys for allowing me to be part of this program, and very much appreciate all your support. My name is Abdiaziz Ali Abshir, and I'm a member of the Ogaden Youth and Student Union. It is an international organization which is based in 25 countries around the world, operates in more than 36 cities, and it's called the Ogaden Youth and Student Union. And I'm the foreign secretary of the organization.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And can you tell us a little bit about the mission of OYSU?
Well, the OYSU was established in Copenhagen, Denmark in 2009, and it was really established by students, and the aim of the organization is basically to advocate for the Ogaden people's universal right to self-determination, and it is an organization really established to educate the international community about the atrocities and the hidden genocide that's taking place in the Ogaden.
Interesting. And so I know, and just a huge situation happening in the Ogaden today, and so we want to, talk more in detail about later in the conversation. But for now, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, Abdiaziz, your own history? Did you come to the States? Were you born in the States? And sort of how you relate yourself to the larger Ogadeni struggle?
Both of my parents are from the Ogaden, and they fled from the Ogaden in the 1970s during the Ogaden War. They came to Mogadishu as refugees, and I was born in Mogadishu. And after the civil war occurred in Somalia, we fled to the diaspora. I was raised in Minnesota, and then we moved to San Diego in 2005. That's where I'm currently living, and I'm a student. I'm a graduate student at San Diego State, and I'm currently in the political science graduate program at San Diego State, where I will be graduating this May, hopefully. So that's about it. And I'm really, this cause is really important to me because my parents were very much involved growing up in the struggle. They were activists themselves, so this is where I call home.
Excellent, excellent. And inshallah, you'll be graduating soon, and I know you're going to continue your fight from there.
Definitely.
Getting back to the issue, overall, what made you, strive to fight so hard for the Ogaden struggle? What is your motivation, and what keeps you fighting for more for the struggle?
I think essentially what I'm most really passionate about is human rights. I think when you look at the human suffering that's taking place in this region, it kind of really motivates you to speak on behalf of the people, the voiceless people of Ogaden, and to really have that power to speak on behalf of their rights. So I think that's really the most passionate for me, is the mere human rights violations that are taking place and the human suffering, because this region, as you may know, is the most impoverished region in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is one of the poorest countries in Africa. So you can imagine the atrocities and the human suffering and the human rights violations that are taking place when the citizens of this region are running to Somalia for stability. There's hundreds of thousands of Somali refugees in the Ogaden that are running to Somalia for refuge. So that kind of paints the picture of how dire the situation in the Ogaden is when the people are running to Somalia for safety.
Interesting. Can you go over more in detail about the history of Ogaden and how much of an influence the Ethiopian colonialism has in Ogaden from the beginning of Menlek invasion and occupation? Can you just go over the history for our audience?
Well, historically, the Ogaden was part of the British colony. It was a British colony, and it remained under the British rule until before World War II. We went under the Italian colonial rule, and then post World War II, he came back under the British colonial rule. So in 1954, the Ogaden was illegally handed over to Ethiopia without the consent of the Ogaden people. So since 1954, there have been successive rebellions against the Ethiopian government. There's been a full-scale war in 1964 between Somalia and Ethiopia, and again in 1977 between Somalia and Ethiopia, the people, as the Somali people of the Ogaden, were never given the right to self-determination. They were never asked whether to be part of Somalia or whether to be part of Ethiopia or whether to be its own nation. So I think that's where the central conflict stems from. And ever since the Ogaden was handed over to Ethiopia, there's been successive genocidal campaigns that have been committed against the people of Ogaden. And as regime after regime, the people have been going through repressive policies, have been marginalized, and have been systematically oppressed to the point in which there's been millions of people that have been displaced. My parents were refugees. I am a current refugee. There's refugees, hundreds of thousands of refugees today in northern Kenya in the Dadaab refugee camp. There's hundreds of other thousands of refugees in Somalia. So the conflict in the Ogaden is colonial in nature. So it was a British colony. The British left the region and handed it over to Ethiopia without the consent of the people. And ever since 1954, the conflict hasn't stopped. And today, the conflict is being carried out between the Ogaden National Liberation Front, which is fighting for self-determination, and the Ethiopian regime under the EPRDF government.
Going back to the British colonial experience, if Ogaden, the people of Ogaden were left to choose whether to become independent or an autonomy or just be part of Somalia, what path do you think would the Ogaden people have taken after the British colonialism? Or what was the wish of the Ogaden people during that time? Do you think, as far as go ahead.
The people they weren't given that opportunity. They weren't given that choice to whether to decide. So I think if given today, after the historic relationship between the Addis regimes, the successive Addis regimes, and the people of Ogaden, there's been, first socially and economically and politically and even culturally, the Ogaden are very much marginalized from the rest of Ethiopia. The Ogaden are ethnic Somalis. They speak the same language. They share the same culture. Economically, they're more closer to Somalia. So there's this distinction between the rest of Ethiopia and the Ogaden, and this distinction has always historically has been taking place. So I think if given the choice whether to be part of Ethiopia, stay part of Ethiopia, or to become its own nation, I personally think that they would choose to be its own nation because of this distinction, because of the marginalization and the repression that has historically been taking place. But unfortunately, the people of Ogaden were never granted this choice. They were never given the right to self-determination, and I think that's what the conflict essentially stems from. And I think if people, the solution about the conflict, within the conflict, kind of lies the right to self-determination. The people given the choice to become its own nation or to be part of Ethiopia, stay and remain part of Ethiopia, it's the fundamental solution that the Ethiopian government doesn't want to address or really doesn't want to stay content with it. So they really don't want that to occur because it's about the natural resources in the region, which we can later talk about.
Yep, and honestly, I've been listening to this for a while, Abdiaziz, and if you replace Ogaden with the word Eritrea, it describes our prior situation almost perfectly. When you're talking about everything from lack of self-determination to day-to-day oppression and displacement and all these different horrible circumstances you're talking about. And for us as Eritreans, for the Eritreans listening to this broadcast, if they're in our generation, they hear from their parents a lot of the atrocities that happened, right? The curfews and being forced to speak Amharic instead of native tongues and all these other things. And so maybe it would go a long way to talk about the day-to-day circumstances of oppression. What is oppression? When you talk about oppression for Ogadenis, what does that look like?
Well, I think the current oppression that's taking place right now is far worse than what has been taken from previous regimes. What's taking place right now is there's a systematic genocidal campaign that's going on in the Ogaden that's being hidden from the rest of the world. The region is rich in oil and gas. So this is potentially the wealthiest area in Ethiopia. So once that the EPRDF kind of found out that this region has this much resources, what they are trying to do is very much decrease the population, especially in the rural areas of the region, in order to exploit the oil. So I think the conflict has gotten much more complicated, and it's not just a political conflict no more. It has been a much more worse of a conflict than it was previously. So there's entire villages where the Ethiopian military comes in, they burn down the entire villages, displace hundreds of thousands of people in order to exploit the natural resources and kind of sell the land to global international corporations so that they can exploit. And it has happened before. They've hired Chinese companies, they've hired Malaysian companies, and these are international corporations that really don't care about human rights, but kind of care about the profits in their pockets. So that's what's going on right now. Rape is being used as a systematic weapon against women, because women are kind of in this region are the backbone of the ownerless struggle. So what the Ethiopian government has been doing is using rape as a systematic weapon to demoralize the women of this region. There's extrajudicial killings that has been taking place. Entire villages have been burnt down, and these are not just allegations, but there's evidence. There's, for example, the American Association for the Advancement of Science has proven satellite images of entire villages and towns that were burnt, 8 locations across the Ogaden region. So there's over 300,000 current refugees in the Dadaab refugee camp in northeastern Kenya. And there's the stories of the victims of this genocide isn't something that's hidden. It is all over. Human Rights Watch has published reports on it, Amnesty International. And this region has also been banned, like all international media has been banned. ICRC is the only region in the entire world where ICRC doesn't operate. They've been banned. Doctors Without Borders don't operate. They've been banned. The UN workers were kicked out from the region. So it kind of paints the picture of how dire the situation is. A political conflict has transformed itself into a humanitarian crisis. And this is a deliberate government policy because this is a genocide. What's going on in the Ogaden can only be identified as genocide because it's a deliberate attempt and systematic attempt to depopulate the region, and especially in the major towns of the region where torture is widespread, extrajudicial killings is widespread, and there's the evidence are there, except that the international community is kind of turning a blind eye because of the geopolitics that is taking place in the region.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, Abdiaziz, if you are someone living in the Ogaden region today, and your village, like you said, has not necessarily been wiped out, you haven't been forcefully displaced off of your land, if you are someone who is, in a sense, fortunate to not have had to deal with the full extent of the horrible things that are being done in the region, if you're someone who is still fortunate enough to be in your village, what is life like for you day to day? What is life like for an average Ogadeni family who hasn't necessarily been fully displaced, can still live day to day? What is life like for them?
I think it's very horrible. It's extremely horrible. It might be one of the worst places to live in the world because there's absolutely there's no food, because the land itself the people itself are being, like, all forms of livelihood are being undermined by the government. There's the land, the displaced and the destitution is so widespread that the only opportunity they have is to flee the land, and that's what hundreds of thousands of people have already done. They fled to Somalia, they fled to Kenya, because the people, there's no livelihood in the region, and the only place really there's any form of livelihood taking place is in Chikchiga, where they kind of set up this colonial outpost where everything is controlled, where there's no political freedom, there's no economic freedom, and the government kind of like holds so much power in the city of Chichiga, and that's where most of the people are fleeing to, either to Chichiga, either to the Somaliland, Puntland, or in the refugee camps in northeastern Kenya. So just to answer your question, I can't really imagine how people are living in. There's no other livelihood because the people are nomadic. When their cattle are being systematically and deliberately killed, where the crops are being burnt, people, they can't live like that. So what they do is they flee. So I think that's really the only choice that the people have, is to flee.
Going back to our Eritreans and Ogaden, we have so much in common as far as Ethiopian colonialism. During the Ethiopian colonialism for 30 years, the Amhara elites, they made us actually force our parents to speak Amharic, and it was pretty much cultural imperialism. So going back to inside Ogaden, how do they view themselves as, in the Eritrean community, we're having discussion on the issue of, do we identify ourselves as Habesha or just Eritrean, and how do Ogaden people identify themselves within the Ethiopian empire, and where does the word Habesha come into play, or the Amharic language, and how do you keep your identity strong when there's occupation happening?
Well, that's the thing, because these people are living in the periphery, so they don't have that connection with the rest of Ethiopia. There's no cultural connection. There's no linguistic connection. There's no that social connection within a nation doesn't exist in the Ogaden. It's imposed upon them. So Amharic is a language that's imposed upon them. Most of the people in this region don't speak Amharic. They speak Somali, because the link between them and the Somalia, the proper Somalia, is so strong that socially they don't really identify themselves as Ethiopian, although that they're living in under colonial rule, Ethiopian colonial rule. So I think that's why it's been so difficult for Ethiopia to really kind of impose the Ethiopian identity on the people, because the people don't identify themselves as Ethiopian. When you ask anyone from the Ogaden, "Oh, where are you from?" they won't say I'm from Ethiopia. They'll say I'm a Somali from the Ogaden region. So that kind of shows you that although colonialism has been taking place since 1954, the region still has that Somali identity, and really their self-identity is more Ogaden than it is Ethiopian.
No, that's great to know. That's great to know, and I think that gels very closely with how we in Eritrea kind of think about that term as well. My question for you would be, just thinking towards the end game on this. O and LF are fighting hard in Ogaden right now. OYSU around the world, you guys are, I know, doing a lot of great work advocating for the Ogaden cause in a time and space where very few people are actually listening. What is the end game for you guys? Is it full independence for the Ogaden region? Is it a referendum for them to decide? Is it full rights as a part of Ethiopia? Well, what's the end game for you guys?
So I would say, I'm speaking on behalf of OYSU, what our organization is advocating for is that the people choose, the people be given that choice to whether to remain part of Ethiopia or whether to become its own nation. That's a universal right to self-determination. These people, the Ogaden people, have never been given this choice. They were really never given this opportunity to implement their right to self-determination. And I think that's what we are advocating for, is that the international referendum take place in the Ogaden, where people come and vote on whether to be part of Ethiopia or whether to become its own nation. And once that is implemented, then the ONLF and the Ethiopian government will be both be forced to respect the democratic right of the people. So, and I think that's what the ONLF is also that's what the ONLF has been advocating since its establishment, because again, this region has gone through a proxy war between Somalia and Ethiopia, and the people haven't been granted the self-determination. Since 1964, 2 wars has been fought between Somalia and Ethiopia over this region, but never has the international community come together and said, let's give the people the voice. Let's give these people their democratic their universal right to self-determination. And I believe that's the ultimate solution to ending the conflict, to ending the suffering, and that's the key to finding a political solution, is that people be given the self-determination that Eritrea has received, the self-determination that South Sudan has received. So once the people decide whether to be part of Ethiopia or whether to become its own nation, then all the conflicting parties will be forced to respect that decision.
Wow, interesting point. You mentioned the economic situation in Ogaden. It's rich with oil. You know, you hear there's a lot of news headlines about the discoveries of just a large reserve gas field. How do you feel about, you know, the Western media not giving much attention to the Ogaden issue? Do you think it's connected to the wealth and the oil that can found in Ogaden? They feel like the Ogaden issue has to be tucked under the rug and ignored so that the oil can just come out easily. How do you feel about the international community view on Ogaden?
That plays a very major role. I think the international community's ignoring of the crisis and the atrocities that are taking place in the Ogaden really does play that. The oil does play a role, but also the crisis in Somalia also plays a bigger role, where the Ethiopian military is being used as a mercenary against the terrorists, the so-called terrorists in Somalia and elsewhere in the region. So the geopolitics within the Horn of Africa plays a fundamental role. Why the international community is ignoring the genocide that's going on in the Ogaden. But there has been Western media that tried to really shed light on the crisis that's going on in the Ogaden. But the Ethiopian government has imposed a extremely strict economic blockade, a media blockade, and a humanitarian blockade. So it's become so difficult for Western media to enter the Ogaden and kind of and to really share the stories about the atrocities and the victims of the genocide that's going on in the Ogaden. For example, there were two Swedish journalists who were investigating the human rights abuses in the Ogaden. In July 2011, they were arrested, and then they were sentenced to 11 years imprisonment. But then they were later released after serving 400 days in very severe conditions in Ethiopia. There's also been the New York Times. Reporters who've been arrested. Voice of America has been arrested. Journalists from Voice of America who went into the Ogaden were arrested and then later banned to ever enter into the Ogaden. Like I said previously, the ICRC is the only region in all of Africa where ICRC has been kicked out. Doctors Without Borders were kicked out. Wow. So essentially there's no humanitarian organizations that are working in the region. There's no independent journalists or any international media whatsoever that operate from the region. So I think the conditions that are taking place are so severe that the international community has been really, although most of them are aware of the situation, they don't know how severe the situation is. So I think that's where the Ogaden diaspora play an essential role, because like I was saying, the OYSU based in 36 cities across the world. So what our objective is to really shed light on the crisis and the human suffering that's taking place in the Ogaden because of the political crisis that's taking place. There's these hundreds of thousands of refugees that are displaced internally, that are displaced externally, and there's millions more that are internally displaced. So I think that's one of the reasons why the international community hasn't been so effective, because of the economic and media blockade. And there's major change that are taking place right now. Recently, there's been legislation passed in the U.S. Congress where they're asking for more access into the Ogaden. There's been EU hearings, the European Union parliamentary hearings on the crisis taking place in the Ogaden. So there is there's this global movement where people are really demanding action be taken in the Ogaden, and I think we're headed in the right direction. We just have to really advocate more and really push our efforts even more so that there's fundamental change that takes place in the Ogaden.
Yep, and that's all really great to hear. I think honestly, so much of what you say, especially the passion of what I'm hearing from you, Abdiaziz, is it just resonates so well with me as an Eritrean. I think all Eritreans listening
definitely
are probably resonating with a lot of what you're saying right now in terms of the passion as well as just the actual facts of what you're saying right now. The Eritrean community is also a community of organizers. I think really more than a lot of immigrant communities you see in the country, in the U.S. and in the European diasporas, we're a community that really comes together and makes things happen for ourselves. And so speaking sort of from that organizing practical perspective, how do you do it within OYSU? How do you make your cause known when it's such an unfair fight?
That's a very important question, and I think as for OYSU, what we've been doing is we've really been pushing towards the universities and kind of educating the student bodies and also the media. We've been pushing the media and also government institutions because essentially these are the ones that make most things happen. Is if we focus more on media and kind of raise awareness about the crisis taking place and educate government institutions and the policymakers, then that's really the only way we can make change happen. And I really want to thank the Eritrean community because they've been a support base for us as OYSU members. We've had a very long and strong relationship with the Eritrean community. We've worked together in a lot of different events we've done, and we've been working together really hard in order to shed light about the crisis taking place in the Ogaden and generally how Ethiopia has been a destabilizing force in the Horn of Africa in general. Because Ethiopia not only has been committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Ogaden, but they've also been committing the same crimes in southern Somalia, where they've been coming into regions in southern Somalia, displacing the population, committing extrajudicial killings. So they've become the current regime in Ethiopia is not only destabilizing the Ogaden, but it is a destabilizing factor in the entire Horn of Africa. And I think with the Oromo community, with the Eritrean community, we've been able to kind of unify most of the communities in the Horn of Africa and to address the crises that have been taking place in the Horn of Africa and really shedding light on how and educating the international community about how the Ethiopian government is the fundamental destabilizing factor that's taking place in the Ogaden. And if the Ethiopian regime is not held accountable for the atrocities and the crimes against humanity that's taking place in the region, then the conflict will be getting worse, the destabilization will be getting worse, and the international community and even the radicalization of the Somali youth will be getting worse. Yep. And the conflict will not just be the Horn of Africa, but it's going to be ending up and spreading to the other regions of Africa as well. And it has been taking place. And this is the fundamental reason why Al-Shabaab has been growing in southern Somalia. These are some of the problems that are not being addressed by within the scholarship and within the debate about the conflict in the Horn of Africa. And I think it is our role to really set up this debate and kind of talk about how Ethiopia should be held responsible and the Ethiopian government be brought to justice for the war crimes and the genocide and the crimes against humanity they have been committing since for decades now.
You mentioned the diaspora. How strong is the Ogaden diaspora, and where are the largest population? And also, what can an Eritrean who is starting to get familiar with the Ogaden struggle, what can that person do to help the cause even further? Or is there a website where people can learn more about the struggle of your, just basically your organization or other organization online or anywhere?
So OYSU, we have a website called OYSUworldwide.com. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, .org. Mm-hmm. It's OYSUworldwide.org. Mm-hmm. So if anyone has any questions, you guys can send us an email. There's a lot of different information on the website. There's also another website called ResolveOgadenCoalition.org, which is another organization, is an advocacy organization. There's a lot of information on that website too. And just to answer your question about the diaspora, the Ogaden diaspora is very huge and is very powerful. And I think they're the ones that are really putting the heat on the Ethiopian government. There's one of the biggest diaspora organization established in Minneapolis. We have another in London and in Nairobi. And there's also been one growing here in San Diego. So anywhere, any one of those cities, you guys can contact us. There's also, if you Google Ogaden, you can see there's a lot of different organizations out there. There's also different news media outlets, websites out there. So if you guys can send us emails regarding, and then there's also, you guys can contact your local, I believe there's a community there in Dallas called the Ogaden American Community of Texas. You guys can also try to call them up, and I believe if you guys can Google, the information will come up as well.
Wow. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks for that contact info. So as far as OYSU, maybe just kind of we have a few minutes here, so maybe just getting into some more details about what you guys do. So I know you guys do a lot of great political work as far as raising awareness, both in the community and out in Washington and many other places around the world. But what do you guys do maybe just in terms of your community in general? Are there any activities that you sort of focus on outside of raising awareness, or is sort of raising awareness the main goal here?
The main goal is really to raise awareness, but we also put on cultural events, kind of educating people about the Ogaden culture, and we also we also do some workshops. We're very community oriented, and we work with other communities in events and other organizing. So we do, but our main focus is really to raise awareness and kind of advocacy. So I think that's the major factors in which OYSU kind of works on.
Beautiful, beautiful. And just to begin to close off here, what is your hope specifically for OYSU and what you hope to accomplish there, but then also for folks living in the Ogaden and folks who are Somali from the Ogaden region all around the world?
I think the OYSU is a new organization. It was established in 2009, so it's a fairly new organization, and it's been tremendously growing. It's right, like I said, it's established in 36 countries around the world, and we're still growing. We're getting contact information almost every day from different cities around the world. So, and you don't have to be from the Ogaden to be part of OYSU. We have many Americans part of OYSU. We have many British citizens part of OYSU. So we very much want Eritreans to be part of OYSU as well. So I think that's our ultimate goal, and that's what I really hope for, is to see OYSU grow even further. We've been blessed enough to even speak in front of the United Nations. We're hoping to speak in front of the U.S. Congress very soon. We've been able to speak at the UN Parliament. So this organization has really evolved into a very powerful political organization, a global organization that has put so much pressure on the Ethiopian government that they've even attempted to kidnap some of our members in the refugee camps in Kenya and in the refugee camps in Yemen, for example. That's how much of a threat we have become to the Ethiopian government. So I really hope that our members grow and our advocacy and our determination still becomes stronger.
So as for just quick question then, noting just the extreme lengths y'all have gone to promote the cause and the danger it seems that you guys sort of pose to the current status quo in Ethiopia and in the Horn of Africa. To what extent are you guys working at all with the ONLF to achieve any of those aims? Is the relationship there, or is it more along the lines of you guys kind of work from the outside to just promote the Ogaden in general?
No, we do have a relationship with the ONLF, because the ONLF is the major institution that's working in the Ogaden. They've shared access with us. They've shared information with us. So the relationship is there, but OYSU is an independent organization, and it's a student organization. It is not a military organization, or it's not a political organization, but rather a human rights organization. And it's although we do have that relationship with the ONLF, we are an independent organization that's focused on human rights and humanitarian relief. We've been able to provide some relief in the Dadaab refugee camps, and we're continuing. Hopefully, the coming years, we want to build a school in the Dadaab refugee camp. So not only are we a humanitarian organization, not only are we an advocacy organization, but we're also becoming a humanitarian organization. So ONLF has been able to help us with access in information, and also in kind of giving us that access that we would not otherwise have, especially when it comes to exposing the genocide and the burning of entire villages. The ONLF has been able to sneak out the video and other documents from the region. So we do have a working relationship with the ONLF, and I also want to note that the Ethiopian government
Abdi,
really does not.
Sorry, if you can wrap it up really quickly, because we're gonna have to actually get kicked off of the air pretty soon in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Do you have any final last 10-second words here?
Yeah, no, I just want to thank all of you guys really for giving us the opportunity and really helping us become the voice of the voiceless people of Ogaden. And I really want to thank the Eritrean community for all their support, their continued support. I just want to note that there are thousands of Ogaden refugees in Eritrea who found stability and really found a home in Eritrea.
Perfect,
and we really appreciate the Eritrean nation for all the support and all the commitment to the cause of the Ogaden.
Perfect. We're going to get cut off now, so thank you for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
This has been Earth Hour.